Welcome everyone who's joined us today from all over Asia and Europe for this webinar on Futures Thinking Application. This is organized in partnership with the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies and the Development Academy of the Philippines. My name is Freya Chowpool and I lead the youth projects here at the Asia Europe Foundation, or ASEF. And today I have the pleasure of guiding us through today's session. At this point, let me give a quick rundown of what we've prepared for you for this hour and a half webinar. I will very briefly introduce the context of the session before handing over to our keynote speaker for today, Ms. Cheryl Chung. And this will be followed by a panel discussion and Q&A with a number of expert speakers who are really excited to be able to share their insights and perspectives with you all on different ways futures thinking can be applied. For the Q&A session, you all have the opportunity to share your thoughts and ask questions. For this, you can use the Q&A function on your Zoom panel, where you can ask your questions, you can upvote any other questions that you find interesting or even reply to them. Please also, if you can, include the country that you're coming from and your name. And if you want to put your LinkedIn in the chat and share where you're writing from, or where you're joining us from today, then we will be happy to provide this networking opportunity as well. So a little bit about the context of this session. As many of you will know, ASEF is an intergovernmental organization working to strengthen mutual understanding between Asia and Europe. We do this across different thematic areas. We bring together a variety of governmental and civil society stakeholders to further strengthen the connectivity and the opportunities for collaboration to solve global challenges between the two regions. And this is our flagship project, the ASEF Young Leaders Summit, which is a leadership development program for young people across Asia and Europe to learn, exchange, and connect with each other. And this session today is part of this year's ASEFYLS Capacity Training 2026, for which we have 95 selected young leaders. But we're also very happy to be able to open up today's session to more young leaders. So I'm very happy to see many of you joining us here today. And at ASEF, this topic of anticipatory leadership for a human-centered future it's a brand new topic for us. And it focuses on how we can prepare young people for the kind of leadership that is needed for a more human-centered society, and prepare young people who can use future-oriented tools to be able to guide present-day decisions. So today's session really aims to give you food for thought and inspiration that we hope you take beyond the session for deeper discussions with your peers and your community. And you will have probably seen that it is part of a webinar series where we have introduced different aspects of anticipatory leadership mindset, systems thinking, futures thinking tools, and we have a couple more webinars still to go as well. With that, I think we are ready to hand over to our keynote speaker, Ms. Cheryl Chung. Allow me to introduce her. So Cheryl is a strategic foresight practitioner and educator who helps organizations navigate uncertainty and prepare for long-term change. She has over 20 years experience across government, academia, and consulting, working with senior leaders from Singapore and across the region to explore emerging trends, challenge assumptions, and design future-ready strategies. Cheryl is the founder and CEO of Tent Futures and an executive education senior fellow at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, where she teaches futures thinking and strategic foresight. Previously held roles in philanthropy, public sector advisory, and futures work, and began her career in the Singapore government working on policy strategy and foresight. Thank you so much for joining us today, Cheryl. I really look forward to your presentation. I hand the floor over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Freya, and hi, everyone. Really excited to be here with you today. Give me 2 seconds while I just swap out the screen share. Hope everyone can see this okay, and I might just go back to full screen. Yes, all good. Okay, thanks so much. Well, looking forward to speaking with all of you today, and looking forward to the questions actually. So please keep them coming, even as I'm speaking. As Freya mentioned, my name is Cheryl Chung. Long-time foresight practitioner, primarily specializing in futures and public policy. But my career has taken me across all the different sectors, right? Like a little bit of a grand tour, I guess. through government, academia, consulting, philanthropy, etc. And it's quite interesting because I've actually been working quite a lot across Asia and Europe and futures people tend to work across a very wide range of sectors, clients, projects, and so on. So how I've decided to put together the sharing today is been to just pick a couple of projects, to share about. I've deliberately chosen them to reflect quite a wide diversity of the work from museum exhibitions to working with hospitals on the future of mental health care to autonomous vehicles. So it's going to be a bit of a whirlwind, but I think they're all roughly asking the same question, right? And the fundamental question is really, how do we make better decisions today when no one actually knows what tomorrow is going.
Cheryl, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think we maybe have a technical difficulty with hearing you, which is absolutely normal and we know can happen on Zoom. Let me just pop back here. So I'm going to try and ask Cheryl and see if we can get this fixed. Cheryl, can you hear us okay? I'm grateful for everyone's patience on this because and understanding because I'm sure you've all experienced this as well before on Zoom. Okay, I'm thinking Cheryl cannot currently hear us. So I'm going to uh, ask everyone's patience for a second while while we try and get this fixed. I believe she might have to be reconnecting very quickly. In the meantime, I want everyone to, if you can pop into the chat, I can see lots of messages from where you're coming from today and your LinkedIn, so you can all share this. And especially you can share, for example, perhaps what are your biggest thoughts if you were able to join some of the webinars previously, some of your takeaways and reflections on this, or some of the things you're curious to learn about today. If you want to pop those into the chat very quickly, and we can have a look at those and see if we can get Cheryl back into the call. Okay, see some messages. I see one from Moni from Cambodia. It says they've learned a lot about leadership and actually implemented it already in your organization. That's wonderful to hear.
That's super good.
Yeah, Carsten, perhaps I bring you in here as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Was it Cheryl coming back, or was it just the screen
I
shifting?
think it's just the screen. Let
It's the
me
screen shifting. But
let me
it's
see if I can get a hold of her.
yeah, super good to be here and to see all the questions and comments. Actually, I can tell all of the participants here today. We of course had a conversation with Freya and the panel, and I was raising sort of my concern: will there be any questions? And Freya said, "Don't you worry, Carsten. There will be tons and tons of questions and insights from all of us here today. So we are very much looking forward to that. I was thinking, whilst we try to get Charlotte back on track, to the three other panelists, simply to do a round of introductions. So maybe if you could just share with us a little bit about your background, a little bit about what you're currently working on, and then we can get the discussion going. So we need a volunteer. We did not really rehearse this, to be super honest. Jonathan, my new best friend. Wouldn't you like to?
Oh, I just pressed a button on the screen there, but I'll go first, Carsten. So, first of all, thank you very much, Freya and Carsten, for inviting us here. It's absolute pleasure to be here. I'm Professor Johnny Freeman. I am based at Goldsmiths at the University of London, um, and I have been here for 27 years. I did not have the foresight when I got here to know I'd have been here 27 years, but I wish I had. And what would I have done differently? I'm academic lead in knowledge exchange at Goldsmiths. Oh, we got no, sorry, I thought you were signaling to me. No, okay. Sorry. I'm academic lead for knowledge exchange here at Goldsmiths. I'm the director of Goldsmiths' brand new institute, the Futures of Creativity Institute, and I run I2 Media Research, a spin-off company from Goldsmiths. But the most foresight-oriented work that we've done spans both what I'd call sort of consumer tech over the last sort of 25 years and currently very much focused on creative industries and positive futures for the creative industries. And on that, I work really closely with Noemi, who is Chief Strategy Officer at the Futures of Creativity Institute, as well as Research Lead at IT. Noemi will introduce herself in a second. The things that I want to sort of focus on, we're not going to go into it. Do you want us to go into our examples now, Kirsten,
Yeah,
or
let's start on that.
yeah.
That would be super
Okay,
nice.
I'll give you a sort of a historical story about me, and I'll keep it as short as I can. But I studied psychology as an undergraduate. I'm a professor of psychology, and when I started with a decision to study psychology, one of the main motivators was because I was absolutely enchanted by the world of advertising and understanding how we can change people's behavior for the future. And that sort of got me into an initial space of, well, what futures are we wanting to see to get people's behaviors to change to? And that's, I think, is one of the sort of core motivators for a lot of our work is to work out what are plausible futures given the forces of change that we're operating in, but what are the positive futures that we want to get to. And we got involved really early on in my time at Goldsmiths in a UK, a big change program here in the UK, where we did a lot of the foresight work in advance of it happening towards digital TV switchover. So where they completely switched off analog television to a digital signal. And there are technical foresight elements of that. So how can you make adapters that make sure old TVs still work? But there are also very human factors of that and understanding what the motivations and barriers are for different audience members. And the strategy that we came up with and worked with all the broadcasters and the regulator here in the UK to make that happen is sort of has was very well regarded in our impact case studies here at the academic sphere, but is genuinely cited by the industry as having sort of mapped the way forward towards a big behavior change for the nation. Um, I'm going to stop now because I've got loads of other examples, which I could go on for hours, but I'm mindful we've got some other brilliant speakers. But the big message for me is obviously we need to apply all the foresight methods that we can, but we must remember the human. And as the professor of psychology, that's my job to remind everybody.
Yeah. So good to have you on board here, Jonathan. And to those of you who haven't met me, I'm the exact opposite of Jonathan, but I fully agree. I'm an economist. So I know basically nothing about human beings, and my experience is actually just like Jonathan. It is the human elements, both within organizations, and I hope we get a chance to discuss that. All of us are here today, how to make good foresight processes, but actually also, Jonathan, in the external world on markets and in societies. I mean, talking about technology and economy is kind of easy. It's not super easy, but it's kind of it's a flow. But the human element, but both in top of organizations and societies, and the many people in all our countries, that's a key uncertainty in my experience. So thank you, Jonathan. Kushal, would you like to join and start the journey?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Carsten, and thank you, everybody. Excited to be here. So, yeah, my name is Kushal. I'm currently calling out from London. I'm between London and New Delhi in India. And yeah, I work for the School of International Futures as a futures literacy designer and leader of projects there. Um, and prior to that, I was with UNESCO's Futures Literacy team for a few years as well. And I suppose my contribution to this conversation is around kind of how, as both a young person in foresight, but also working with young people in foresight, how we kind of do that. And just giving you a few examples of people who've been doing some cool work, which hopefully inspires you to go and do some of the same. Um, so a lot of the kind of stuff that we've been doing is around building like your futures literacy skills, are very akin to this kind of workshop series that you're all a part of, and getting you to kind of question assumptions and take on different approaches. And just going to give you a couple of little case studies from people in different parts of the world who are doing really cool work. So one thing that the School of Industrial Futures runs is something called a Next Generation Foresight Practitioner Program, which invites kind of people between the ages of 18 to 35 to do their own foresight projects. And we've had people across the world who've been doing really great things. People in Nigeria who've been using foresight to do youth-led processes for envisioning the future of the state and working with policymakers. Folks in New Zealand who've been working with Maori youth organizations to think about different approaches which are culturally and contextually rooted, challenging kind of dominant frames and dominant narratives. And here in the UK, we have had a strategy for next generations program where we had a few different youth across the country working in their local communities to kind of advocate for intergenerational dialogues. And that's now being as part of a catalyst, if you like, for the emergence of an all-parliamentary group within the UK Parliament around future generations. So these are the kinds of things that we started to see just as a consequence of young people's voices about the future, their own imaginaries around the future being platformed and being shared. We do some work around long-term governance hubs as well, so it's creating communities in different cities and countries around the world where citizens, academics, students, lots of different kinds of people come together to kind of think about what does the long term, what does the future look like. And a little bit of work around kind of alternative methods or decolonial transformative approaches to thinking about the future too. So we've been doing some research around rethinking narratives around time and trust and big concepts which frame our conversations about the future in the first place, and challenging the kind of boundaries of what's possible and what's permissible when it comes to thinking about the future. So these are kinds of things that we're doing, and really, I suppose the little message to leave you all with is that, I hope you have your own exciting projects that you're going to run, and we're here to support and amplify those. And really, we think that the most creative, transformative futures work is one which engages at kind of across society. It engages with young people, engages with citizens, it engages with leaders, so there's a kind of policy angle to it, and it just engages with different organizations and sectors, and everyone's got a role to play here. So just excited to actually learn about the work you're doing. So please do share in the chat, and excited to kind of follow what's going on there. And I'll pass over to Naomi.
Great. Naomi, over
Thank
to
you,
you.
Kushal. That was brilliant. Tough act to follow. I'm Naomi. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I am a researcher. I've been a researcher, interdisciplinary researcher for about 10 years. I work across industry and academia. I would say my work is at the intersection of more traditional audience insight and foresight, and some design research as well. So it's very important for me that as it is for the rest of the panelists, that any foresight work is very much kind of grounded into application. And that's where kind of the design research comes in my research practice. I focus currently my role working with Johnny at Goldsmiths and I2 Media on media and tech specifically, especially in the creative industries. And right now, I feel like we work at two very different levels. So the CoStar network is actually a huge infrastructure investment from the UK government. So that's about 75 million. And so the foresight there is kind of really starting from this acceleration in technology and the convergence of media across film and TV, video games, and live performance, and trying to figure out what that means. And then we also work at a very micro level or much smaller level with the recognition that actually innovation happens at a kind of one-person unit at the moment as well, and just one individual really can make different, because we more than ever have a kind of more democratized tools to make a difference. So I think there's going back to kind of the engagement, I think there's a really, really interesting continuous negotiation there between kind of, what happens at policy level, what happens in industry, what happens at the citizen level. And I would also add, especially in the creative industries right now, what happens at the worker level. So a lot of creative workers are obviously having, and beyond creative industries, are having their work disrupted. So what we're trying to do here at COSTAR as well is bringing in their perspective and their vision of the future as well, which I think is really important.
Thank you, Noemi. Thank you, all of you. Now, as you can see, we've got Cheryl back. Just rounding this part of the session off. I think the thing about the voices is so very important, and I would hope we can get to continue that discussion after Cheryl's keynote. It's not, in my opinion, it's not only about young people, but it's about people without a voice for any kind of reason, either in organizations and societies. And I think we've started a journey in the foresight community globally, but we're still baby steps. But I would love to explore that with you. Over to you, Freya. You are the mastermind behind all of this.
Thanks, Carsten. Thanks, Johnny, Noemi, and Kushal. We have Cheryl back now. So I'm going to invite you to start again or go back into your keynote. And I will share also the screen. Let me do that now. We've just been doing some introductions to start with and sharing some initial points of view so that we can dive into the dialogue afterwards as well. So as you wish, let me know when to move through the screen. And you're on mute at the moment. There we go.
Great, thank you so much. And apologies everyone for the technical difficulties. This is a humbling reminder that no matter how well you plan, the future will surprise you in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways. So best to be try to figure out how to be adaptable in multiple possible futures as well. But I'm gonna just start from the top. I have no idea where I got cut off. So let's start from the very beginning if that's okay. My name is Cheryl Chung. I've kind of been focusing on futures and public policy for the last about 20 years or so of my career. But I've kind of approached it from different sectors. So that's been quite an interesting journey, looking from government in-house to academia, then consulting, looking at it from the philanthropy lens. And I think one big and quite critical theme that comes up quite a lot is really this idea of how do we help leaders, organizations, make decisions in conditions of uncertainty when we are not sure actually what tomorrow is going to bring, right? So it's a quite an interesting tension, that we all face in various scales and in various parts of our work. So that's what I'm going to explore today. What I've chosen to do today is highlight a number of case studies. Today's session is supposed to be very application focused, so I've tried to bring kind of real world applications from projects over the years, and I've deliberately picked a very weird and wonderful range of them. So ranging from museum exhibitions to future of hospitals to autonomous vehicles, just to give you a range, right, of different possible applications. And then I hope that's something that will give us some fodder to chat about later. So without further ado, maybe let's just go to the first case, and you can skip one more slide as well. So this first example is an example from last year. So last year I had the privilege of working with the Art Science Museum here in Singapore on an exhibition called Another World is Possible. And the basic idea of the exhibition was to explore different narratives about the future, right? So we had, if you think about the typical narrative when you think about the future, very often it's some sort of like Blade Runner, Terminator, dystopia, right? And actually we are very often lack the language, also the imagery, to kind of reimagine what the future could kind of look like. So we had this very interesting opportunity to partner with the Art Science Museum as part of a public exhibition here in Singapore. And what I did was I brought together young leaders, very much like yourselves. I am on the board of a youth development foundation called the Halogen Foundation here. And the idea was to basically bring them together in a participatory workshop and reflect a little bit on how young people actually think about the future, right? How do they present, their images of the future of Singapore? And it was a very interesting experience because, we juxtaposed that with, I'm going to say, like in a larger gallery of typical images of Singapore, right? Of the future of Singapore, which one of them would be something like the one that you see on the screen. These would be, beautifully, very beautifully done, detailed renderings of Singapore cityscape, usually done by big brand name architects, and reflecting very much this very shiny, very polished vision of the future, right? It's designed to look very definitive, very sure, very confident, right? But the reality is that actually the future is built in so many little pieces, and when we were running the youth workshop, one of the big reflections was really that actually the future is multiple, right? That when we're dealing with it at the cold face of future making, if that makes sense, it's really a multi-perspective taking kind of exercise. So if you go to the next slide, so our exhibition was the exhibit that closed off the exhibition. And really the idea was to discuss, a conversation around stories of slower futures, right? The idea that actually, in many cases, we don't necessarily know what the future looks like, but it's the important part is the collective imagining. It's the coming together, it's the trying, experimenting, building, finding like-minded people, to kind of bring these future visions together. And, as you can see, they're much more tentative, much more handmade, much more experimental, than the shiny renderings, of what we're looking for. And I think this brings me to my maybe first reflection point when talking about these future applications, right? Is that, very often, when we think about history, for example, we think about national level histories, we always been very resolved and kind of put in the box and tied together with a ribbon, right? But when we reflect on local histories, the histories of the communities of people, what we end up finding is multiple perspectives, right? That don't necessarily cohere, that contradict each other, that are messy, but that are all valid as well, right? And if I draw that parallel to futures thinking, and what does it look like for leaders in this generation to start to look at futures, they were also looking at both these national level narratives, and who articulates these national level narratives, but we're also looking at individual level narratives, right? Individual leaders, individual communities, and what role do they play in building out these futures. So I think for me, creating that space to explore that piece and to embrace the complexity in that discussion is actually quite a critical part of futures thinking applications. Yeah, so this is a little example from the, I would say, arts and culture world, and how we try to shift these perspectives, of the future. What do they look like? We can go to the next slide, and maybe one more. So the next example that I'm going to talk about is actually something that I'm working on currently. This is a project that I'm doing with the Institute of Mental Health here in Singapore, which is our national psychiatric hospital. As you can imagine, they are basically the specialist quaternary care institute here in Singapore. The most complex, the most challenging cases would go to the Institute of Mental Health. And I put two images here on the screen, just to reflect a little bit of how the conversation is going, in the future of mental health and future of mental health care in Singapore and of course all around the world, right? As many of you are probably quite concerned also, and some of you may even work in this area, mental health challenges across the whole population, but also, across young people, are becoming more complex, I would say. So the image on the left-hand side of the screen reflects a survey that was done on World Mental Health Day, reflecting some of the increasing mental health challenges, right, that individuals face. And these statistics are Singapore statistics, but, they are mirrored all across the world, right? So, when you're looking at the future of something like mental health, which is obviously a very complex issue, it's multifaceted in many ways. You see challenges happening from all sorts of places, right? You see issues coming in from the changing demographics, that and the changing demands and needs for mental health care. So, in Singapore, this might be the rapidly aging population, right? It could be, young people facing different kinds of challenges. It could be neurodevelopmental disorders, that kind of thing. Then you see a lot of challenges on the what I'm going to call system transformation level, right? So you see different trends that reflect also a system under a lot of constraints. So whether this is energy crisis to climate change, to thinking about how you redesign, spaces, to workforce scarcity, you're seeing a lot of trends in that space as well. And then, of course, you see a lot of trends in the provision of mental health care, right? So in Singapore, there's a very big conversation around what community care looks like, what does it mean to be able to address and provide mental health care, at the community level rather than everything being hospitalized, right? And then the frontiers of treatment are also changing, right? Whether this is the digital side of it, to precision psychiatry, what does all these start to mean? So that's the left-hand side of the screen, right? These trends that we observe that are kind of all coming to us, kind of a big and scary way in many ways. And then if we look at the other side of the screen, we look at I'm going to say somewhat incremental in some ways, solutions that are actually not that trivial to put out, right? But this is an example of, one of these solutions, which, in and of itself is obviously a critical piece, right? So this is about increasing the beds in psychiatric wards in the hospital, for example, right? So these are very necessary, but you can't help but have this feeling that you got a tension here, right? That there is this huge future coming, but incremental change in the solution making space is not enough. Which brings me to my next slide. So as part of a project like this, I would look at again the history. Even though I'm a futurist, I do spend a lot of time looking at history. The history of mental health care in Singapore, for example. And some of you, I don't know whether you've covered the causal layered analysis in your tool building yet, but one of the futures tools, that we might use is something like the causal layered analysis, which is basically this idea of how do we drill down from what we see at both at kind of like top headline level, but also down into the systems level, right? The policy level, and then into the deeper structure, I'm going to say myth and metaphor level, And if I look at the history of mental health care, in Singapore, but also all around the world, it's also gone through different eras, right? And the idea is an era, just like Taylor Swift, it kind of encapsulates a specific kind of time period, with very distinctive characteristics. Right. So one of these eras in the mental health care space, and this kind of goes back to our colonial past, right, is this idea of a psychiatric hospital being almost like a prison, right? It's where it's basically patients get locked up, essentially. If you go to the Heritage Center for the psychiatric hospital, you will see like old gates, straight jackets, that kind of thing. They feel very severe, right, when you look at it with modern eyes, right? So there was definitely one era, where if you look at that past, that it was a very kind of prison-like metaphor. And right now, it feels like we are like in a hospital-like metaphor, right? Which basically means that, we are approaching mental health care very much in the view of hospitalization, clinical practice, clinical treatment, and so on. And, then the question that institutions have to ask themselves is, what's the next era? If we know all these challenges of mental health coming forward, and, we as leaders have the opportunity to come ahead of designing a new era, and building towards a new era, how can we reimagine what this future looks like, right? And it's I think a really important point, to also emphasize, if my first example with the Art Science Museum was a individual level example, then think of this one as an institution level example, right? So at an institution level, just as you have to reimagine individual community futures, and open up that space for multiple perspectives and plurality, right? Multiplicity, you also have to do the same for institutions, right? And the role of the institute, and the organization and the leaders of those organizations, is to also bear in mind that, we are shifting eras, right? That to be able to anticipate, and almost design, what these new eras could look like. And that's a mark of a, strong leader in this space. I'm going to go to my third case study. So the third case study is one which is actually 10 years ago, and I like doing when I asked to give a presentation like this, I do like to look at cases which I did many years ago. Also, with the benefit of hindsight, or not, you can maybe in a more clear-eyed way, kind of reflect on, the learning points, I would say, of these some of these examples. So this was my very last government job about 10 years ago. I was at the Ministry of Transport, where I was helping them to set up their futures team. So as part of that portfolio, I oversaw the starting up, of their autonomous vehicle portfolio. So if you think about the challenges, that you imagine me 10 years younger, right? Also a much younger person has in a portfolio like this in a big ministry. At that time, I was, basically a young officer in a ministry that was at the time facing a lot of political challenges because by Singapore standards, at least, Singapore was going through some public transport issues, right? So trains breaking down, road congestion. This is pre-ride hailing, cannot get a taxi when it rains, that kind of thing. So it was becoming, and Singapore was, the infrastructure was not keeping pace with population growth, right? So it was becoming a bit of a political issue. Then you imagine there's now a young futures officer who's just been hired for this new job, who comes and tells the boss, "Oh, hello, I think you should think about cars that drive themselves." At best you sound a little crazy, right? But the act of putting potentially what is a core policy challenge or core societal issue onto the policy agenda is a non-trivial act, right? And then the question is, how do you convince people, right? To be able to take you seriously. So this is the project that I want to talk about. If we go to the next slide. So, with the benefit of hindsight, of course, we can see how the autonomous road testing, the institutional infrastructure has built up over time, right? And this slide reflects the expansion of the testing sites here in Singapore starting from very small areas, very controlled, basically by exemption order, to larger and larger testing sites, which allowed for kind of, I would say, mutual learning between industry as well as as well as government, right? And that's a really important part of the process. But again, if you think about it as 10 years ago, then you have this challenge of what we call the Collingridge dilemma, right? So you have a new emerging technology coming on board, and you have this tension of, on the one hand, you don't know enough about the technology because it's still emerging, right? So you have an information problem. You have a lack of information, basically. Both government, in this case, but also private sector, industry, academia, we're all learning, right? But at the same time, you have a control problem, which is on the other side, right? The control problem is that if you wait too long to regulate, then it becomes like squeezing toothpaste back into the tube, right? You kind of lose control. Social media to some extent went through this bit of this kind of tension, right? By the time we realized the harms of social media, right, actually, the ship had long sailed already, right? So emerging technology has this phenomenon. So then the dilemma for governments in this case would be, how do you regulate, right? How do you set up systems, that are able to not only help you regulate, but also to help you learn, and learn in an intelligent way about the future together with other parties, including industry, including private sector, including academia and so on. So these images here are the physical manifestation of what these regulatory sandboxes would look like, right? A way to ring fence your experiments so you don't go and, tank the entire the entire transportation system, but still you allow in, safe and increasingly expensive ways, opportunity for learning, testing, getting it wrong, but limiting the, I'm going to say, downsides of failure, right? So this is also a really interesting way of starting to think about these issues. And then if we go to the next slide. So then what you would see is that, again, how things have developed over the last 10 years or so is really this quite iterative approach, right? And the picture on the right-hand side is a picture from a recent announcement on, again, more autonomous shuttle testing and so on. And what you can see here is the accumulation of many people's efforts over a very, very long period of time, over 10 years, right? Starting perhaps with a small presentation, to a boss in from a futures perspective, right? This is how you think about autonomy in vehicles, and these are the opportunities that you might have. And then the regulators come in, right? The industry experts come in, the urban development has to come in, right? And I think this is a really interesting example of thinking about what futures and how and futures and really leadership, right? At a societal level, right? Where it is not so simple as just one organization necessarily, as powerful as the organization may be, dictating what the future looks like, right? And again, what does reimagining this future look like when you have these multi-stakeholder complex systems? And I wanted to end with this particular project for two reasons. The first reason is because of, just to bring back to this idea of futures thinking applications, right? And I'm not, even though that's my specialization, I'm not so wedded to it to say that this is the only tool that's available for leadership, right? I think sessions like this are designed to increase your toolkit, right? And a good leader has many tools and knows when to use these tools, right? But I think one reflection, if I may, is this idea of how do we think systematically about the future, just as we think systematically about the past, right? And what are the tools that are available to us to start to unpack a little bit more what are both the opportunities, but also the potential challenges and unintended consequences of this future. I often quote a BBC interview that H.G. Wells did in 1932. It was I think the radio program was broadly on communication, but it's often cited because in this interview he has a bit of a rant about the car, right? And if you think about this being like almost 100 years ago, at the dawn of a new technology, at that time was the automobile, now is maybe autonomous vehicles. And basically he says something along the lines of, how come we were so unprepared, for all these consequences, that we didn't, and then they all caught us by surprise, right? How it ended up, changing roads, how it changed transportation, how we move, how it affects people, pedestrians, etc. Right? How come we were so unprepared? So he calls for the idea of just as we systematically look at the past, and have professors of history, how come we don't have professors of foresight, right? As a more established field. So I think that for me is one reflection, right? What are the ways that we can think more critically and more systematically about the future? I think the second piece, which and I often like to cite this Ministry of Transport example because it is a complex issue. It is obviously the kind of issue that no individual, no matter how senior and intelligent you are and powerful you are, no one individual can solve on their own, right? It's multi-stakeholder, multi-year, really complex, kind of issue. And then the question is, what is the role then of a young leader in this kind of environment, right? And I often joke that actually when you are building the future, I mean, it sounds very lofty, right? Or you're changing the world, that kind of thing, right? But the day-to-day experience of it is can be quite humbling, right? In an example like this in a policy department, you're a you're a junior level bureaucrat, and what your main tools are preparing presentation slides and talking points and speeches and writing reports, right? So the future is created, 2 paragraphs at a time. Every time a policy memo hits your desk, you write another 2 paragraphs about, autonomous vehicles and how they might, improve Singapore's Singapore society in the future. And that patient building, right, is something that's very critical actually in this space. So I'll leave you with one last thought, which is a quote that I often go to. It's a quote from the Ethics of the Desert Fathers, right? So taking this conversation in a very different turn, and it goes something along the lines of, you are not obligated to finish the work, right? Finish the work of building the future, finish the work of solving climate change, finish the work of alleviating poverty. But at the same time, you're not at liberty to desist from it or stop it, right? So I think that's a thought I would like to leave you with as we talk about applications of futures thinking. That at the end of the day, we're all building to this big future, right? Maybe it's a national level, societal level future, which is like a big puzzle that we're trying to kind of put together. And we may not be the ones who are able to put the whole puzzle together, but nevertheless, as individual leaders, our responsibility is still to place our individual puzzle piece, right, and try to connect it to the neighboring puzzle pieces to try to form this picture. So I'll leave it there, and looking forward to the panel discussion. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, Cheryl. I'm going to say we dive straight in. I'm going to bring everyone back in. That was so interesting, and I think we'll hand over to Carsten to start
Great.
off this discussion.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Super great insights. And I like the diversity of the cases you brought to the table, because that is probably what we all see. Foresight is increasingly important in all kinds of organizations.
Yeah.
Before we get to the panel, just two small questions to you, Cheryl, if that's okay. You
Yeah.
mentioned in the autonomous vehicle example that you came in there 10 years younger than today, pushing foresight and pushing futures thinking. Have you seen any kind of development in how organizations perceive and start having these conversations about foresight? Because here today we have 80 young leaders that will put foresight into the toolkit and will be in exactly your position from 10 years ago. Have you seen any kind of positive or negative development in how organizations are responding to this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, definitely the demand for foresight has increased a lot. I do think COVID had a very significant impact on that, and it's less so the conversation around being able to predict, so less so about the horizon scanning conversation, and more so about the preparedness conversation. Right.
Yeah.
So really this idea of how come we were so unprepared, having said that, it's also a time of very great anxiety, right? So there's also this tension of cognitively understanding that it's important, but emotionally not being willing to invest, right? We see this in ourselves, we see this in our leaders as well, right? So but yeah, that's definitely we can speak more over the panel, but that's kind of top line reflection.
And the other short question, and actually to all of us on this call, feel free to add the questions in the Q&A section of the screen. We will respond to those just in a short while. Shall the three cases you showed us today, and all your other extensive work on foresight, could you maybe just add a few words on how you measure success? What is a good outcome? What is a bad outcome? And I mean, we all make mistakes and we all have wonderful successes, but just a few reflections on that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I should say that part of the role that I played in philanthropy was actually as an evaluator, which is a weird combination for a foresight person. So I have very strong views about evaluation of foresight. Maybe the way I will respond to that is to think about it conceptually, and then I'll make a more detailed comment, right? So the conceptual distinction in my mind is both to consider what are tangible outcomes as well as intangible outcomes. So what do I mean by that? Tangible outcomes in a policy space would be like, okay, for example, we have increased the number of, the area under autonomous vehicle testing, right? This is a very tangible outcome, very, relatively speaking, quite easy to measure, right? And then you can think of similar ones, right? You do output measures like number of, companies, the growth of the industry, the market cap, that kind of stuff, whether or not you've changed legislation, all this kind of stuff, right? So these are very tangible. Having said that, the things that are very difficult to measure, but are kind of like the roots underneath the tree, right? Would be things like level of trust, reputation, right? So for example, one of the hooks that got me to join this job way back when was because the person who would have been my future boss basically said to me, "Oh, it's we want to be an innovative policy, innovative ministry, right? We are under a lot of political pressure right now, but we have to get ahead of that, right? So the fact that you're demonstrating innovativeness, that you are able to foster trust between both the regulator, in this example, as well as the industry developers, as well as industry themselves and academia and so on. These are all intangible outcomes, much more difficult to measure. But you will find that, once you break the trust, once you break the reputation of being innovative, on all these kinds of things, then the actual policy outcomes become very difficult. So that's always the tension, right? As with life, right? The things that are difficult to measure are the things that form the basis of your success. But actually, if you're chasing all these outward metrics, it can be quite difficult. Yeah, insufficient, necessary but insufficient condition. Yeah, but we can again speak more with that with the rest of the panel.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And now over to the full panel. To the three of you, any kind of comments, reflections to start with? Now we heard Cheryl speak. The floor is yours. Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, Cheryl, first of all, thank you so much for sharing those examples. They're really cool, and they kind of speak also to your question, Carson, of what is success. And so I think there are multiple ingredients of what is successful application of foresight in what Cheryl was just showing us. So there's really tangible outcomes of the work and thinking and application of methodology. So the extension of the number of kilometers of autonomous vehicle space in the city is a really clear one. The other is kind of the engagement with, or resonating with the local populations, and we heard from Kush's intro as well, like how that's working in various projects there. So that's one thing. I think there's a real sort of chime of has to resonate with the people who you're speaking to and studying and foresighting, and it has to then have a tangible outcome. In CoStar Foresight Lab, we hold ourselves to a couple of sort of measures of are we succeeding? One is the extent to which our partners across the research and development infrastructure across the UK sort of take on board what we're saying. And I'm going to invite Noemi in a minute to share about how we've had to come up with some quite innovative formats to really engage our audiences in a way that reports are great, presentations are great, but we found I'll steal your thunder, Noemi. It's about film, but Noemi's going to talk more about that in just a second. That really sort of connects with them and suddenly gets everyone talking about the futures that we're pointing to. There are obviously policy impacts we really try and focus on. So when the UK government comes to consult us on technology adoption, on what are the skills issues facing creative production and so on and so forth, that's a sign that the work that we are delivering is really sort of having impact. And most important, I think, for us and for the CoStar network is that we're very much focused as an industry network. Although we're very lucky to have some public funding. It's industry taking on board the findings. This isn't sort of a nice to have vanity project. It's actually helping UK that's the perspective we're coming from, but obviously globally as well. We actually went to the Philippines to share some of this work earlier in the year. For industry to take it on board is hugely important as a metric of success for us. But one of the things that's really helped that is the films. So Noemi, do you want to maybe say a few words about the films?
Yeah, of course. I think as sort of just one short reflection on what both Cheryl and Johnny have been saying, I think there's something really important around engagement as a metric of success, especially because I do feel like these days when we talk about doing foresight work, some of the work that we do is also giving some agency back. I think quite a lot of people feel like they don't have much agency about what happens, especially at macro level around them. So yeah, there's something really important around that. Then going to the film, so around engagement, we have been obviously publishing as a kind of government initiative, sort of more traditional type of reports and academic reports, which were serving audiences, but sort of stopped at a very intellectual level. And we wanted to go a little beyond that. So what we did was use some of the scenarios that we wrote across to reports about the futures of the creative industries and make a short film that brought to life the scenarios. This is important on two sort of levels. The first one is, again, the outcome. So having a way to engage people who don't necessarily feel like they want to engage with a big intellectual and kind of technical PDF. But also at a procedural level. So actually, the work that we did to write the reports was to engage creative workers. So, for example, we interviewed and asked a 3D sound artist to share their thoughts on the future of performing arts venues, as well as the future of machine learning and kind of the future of the role of the artist. And we asked her to write one of the scenarios as well for the future. And then we brought her along into the film production. So actually, she was the composer of the film, which again, it feels like it sort of brought her engagement to a different level. And so far, the film has been very successful. So we played it at different occasions in London. We also brought it to the Philippines and Spain. And usually we accompany it with a sort of, again, a kind of collective signal gathering exercise. So we use it as a prompt for people to feel empowered to share what they think is a direction towards the future.
Thank you. Jonathan, you're muted.
I was going to say, what do we call that method, Noemi? If people want to...
Signal stations.
Yeah.
Of course.
Cheryl, is that a hand? Would you like to share something? No? Oh, okay. Over to you, Kushal. Your initial reflections, and also because I do think if we look at the comments and the chat in this meeting, the thing about agency is a very, very important topic. And I also think you touch upon in the beginning of your introduction about the voices being heard in these foresight processes. So I would really like if you could elaborate a little bit on that. And maybe if I can just add a little twist, and this is maybe just I don't know, Danish reflection, but there seems to be, how can I put this, more negative feelings and sentiments towards the future in many countries right now. And I would imagine, once again, me not being a psychologist, I would imagine that makes it more difficult to hear voices somehow. And the conversation will be formed based on this more pessimistic view. Maybe I'm wrong, but over to you.
I don't think you're wrong at all, Carsten. I think you've nailed it. And it was great to hear everybody's contributions, and thank you, Cheryl, for a super talk. And I think the first thing that popped to mind for me, just in response to the question about success, is that naturally across contexts it varies, right? Depending on who you're working with and what the objectives of your work is with those different types of people and the projects that you're doing, the theme that you're working on, all of those things. So there's no one size fits all tick box approach to that. And I think that's important for us to remember in whatever process that we're designing and that we're running. And just to kind of the point, I think that what I really liked from Cheryl's piece was that, there's, I'm not going to go into kind of, I suppose, the tangible policymaking examples that we've heard from the others. I think those are great examples. I just think the one thing I would add is on the mindset piece here, I think there's as much as it's important to kind of see those shifts in policy making, there is sometimes a danger, for want of a better phrase, of kind of a futures washing, where actually the people do the work, but it doesn't actually lead to kind of a mindset shift. And so I think some things we need to just kind of bear in mind as we do this, as we learn about these different approaches and case studies, is that, what does it mean to hold agency in the face of the future, but at the same time have some humility, because future is an inherently uncertain and complex terrain, right? So how do we navigate that? And do that in community with other people who naturally, our different lived experiences shapes our relationship to the future, how we imagine, how we anticipate. So there is that kind of academic research importance to just explore what it is that makes people's imaginaries and ways of anticipating tick in different contexts. Um, and I suppose just on this point about, what to do and how when it gets hard. So like I've seen in some work I've done, especially with more marginalized groups in India, like the politics of the day does shape the kinds of futures you can come up with. And I think it's important that we don't shy away from that, that the act of futuring, of thinking about the future, is a political one. And that in a context where you feel your present is so oppressive, it's difficult to think about the future in some ways can be a luxury, and at the same time is vitally important, because where else do you find hope? So it's kind of, there's this tension to explore there and to kind of sit with, and you do that really just by talking to people and holding that space for those conversations. But I do see that quite a bit sometimes, and often it's just actually, trying to unearth where that hope or where that fear is coming from is sometimes more important than, putting a particular tool on the table or getting a particular policy outcome. It's just, people
Mm.
feeling like that their imaginary means something, and it's important to just have that surface. And of course, there are loads of different ways of doing that. And I think that was what was so good about what we just heard about the films, but also the museums and the artifacts and the work the show is describing, is that there's no one size fits all to doing foresight work either. There's got to be that kind of varied level of engagement. For some people, making films is the right way to engage them and to get their stories heard. For others, it's something more, it's the kind of building things. And for others, it might be a policy report. But it's that combination of those things I think is pretty vital. But yeah, I think to your point, Carsten, I think it is hard in particular contexts, and at the same time, it's in those contexts where we need to almost rethink how foresight is done, because there are ways of thinking about the future which we might not necessarily call foresight traditionally, right? But that is what people are doing. People are planning and preparing for the future all the time. We don't
Yeah.
necessarily call it foresight though. So it's just kind of finding ways to bring that out and understanding what's beneath some of that. Because we're in a moment where, having a hopeful, progressive vision about the future is difficult in particular contexts. And it's just, making people feel like they can share what they want to share about that. And that it will have some bearing, that people are listening, and it does carry weight, and it can inform policy and all of those things. So it's important that those conversations also aren't just tick box ones, but they are genuinely participatory and they mean something. Otherwise, it can be quite extractive. So I think those are just some kind of, I suppose, principles and things to think through as we do the work.
Noemi, you applauded, but any comments?
I just thought that was a brilliant intervention, and I sort of went ahead a little, and I was looking through the questions earlier, and one of the questions is around skills for being foresight, and I just wanted to, I just jotted down humble before, and so just wanted to echo what Kushal was saying about humility. I definitely think that's one of the key skills we can talk, and if we decide to go in more depth, we can talk about storytelling and rigor and lateral thinking, but actually knowing when to put your ego aside is so important as well.
I do agree. I do agree. And Kushal, I think the future voicing, I like that. I think we see a little bit of that as at the moment. And then you introduced a new concept, to me at least, the future as a luxury. Uh, that is absolutely worth thinking about. And finally, this everyday perspective, I like that, because to all the panelists now, before Freya, we dive into the questions from the audience, the multitude of voices. I mean, it's one thing to have different tools and different ways of representing results from a foresight process, the films, the cartoons, the interactions. But I really like the perspective on people. No matter how passive they are, they're still preparing for the future. So we are all there. But still, at least as we see it at CIFS, how to get how to get the passive voices, the voices lowest in society, in hierarchies, in organizations, how to get them on board. I still see that as difficult and critical. So any comments to that before we leave the floor to Freya? and the questions.
So
Jonathan?
I can just jump in on some examples of the work we've done in CoStar Foresight Lab, where um, we work with the British Film Institute, we work with government departments, we work with a lot of sort of big organisations, so we have access to industry voices very easily and regularly, and that is part of the story, but it isn't the whole story. With the nuance and the real concerns and the real uncertainties, the real insecurities for the future of production of film, TV, and games and live performance is very much on the workers, the people who actually make it, the creatives. And one of the first, when we presented it, obviously several times our work, and one of the questions we used to get in the early days was, "Oh, this is all very glossy and brilliant, and but have you spoken to any real artists?" And we very proudly say, absolutely. Not only have we spoken to them, we've got them involved in creating the research. Like Naomi said, they've written some of our scenarios. They've then interpreted them into artistic visions for the future in the films. So I think it's absolutely essential that we embed the people whose futures we're looking at really in the process. Another example is on a sub-project, the ACES project, which is AI, carbon, equity, and skills. And we've been doing workshops around the UK on that. The ones up in Newcastle were on EDI, Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion. And we had just regular people who work in the space of creative work, but who have lived experience of the realities of navigating the world with various additional challenges. So I think it's absolutely essential to reiterate that.
Good to hear. Thank you. I'm thinking, Freya, over to you and the questions. I see we have a lot of questions, and we have 20 minutes left, so over to you, Freya.
Yeah, let's bring in some of these questions. So there's a question here from Renz around how young people are inheriting very complex systems as they're entering into careers, as they're entering into or trying to lead their youth organizations and trying to make a change. And how Renz asks, how can young people ensure that futures literacy is not just an academic exercise, but also a tool for empowering communities? And what is that role of young people, especially in a system that is perhaps quite daunting in how complex the system they inherit is? Yeah, open this up for anyone, and also
Yeah,
Carsten.
the floor is open. Anyone?
Kushal, I saw you
Take a
nodding
stab at
head,
it.
or Noemi, go ahead.
Oh,
I think Cheryl is unmuted.
Oh,
Cheryl.
oh, should I go?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for the question. I think it's a really critically important one, and maybe reflecting on some of the earlier comments that some of the different panelists have also made. Um, one question I always ask myself is whether or not we're helping people participate well, right? I think the challenge I have with engagement as a metric, coming from a policy standpoint, is engagement doesn't necessarily change decisions, right? So I think the tension between for a foresight person working in complex systems, and all of us, right? Because they're working in complex systems, is you do have to you do have to be able to map the decision making, and what does that look like, right? Because if not, it is very challenging to move the needle. Yeah. So what I would really love to see more of is people who are better brokers, of these different kinds of knowledges, these different kinds of perspectives, and being able to bridge this multiple perspective view. So just as, you need to be able to advocate for the lived experience of a citizen who is marginalized, you also need to understand how decisions are made, right? If not, it's very difficult to kind of bridge the two. And then the question is, of course, then what's the role of a young person, right? I I can share maybe in the chat later on the behind the scenes video from the workshop that we did with the Art Science Museum. And so we had some of the workshop participants reflecting on their experience. And one of them said something to the effect of like, it's about starting with pockets of change, right? This idea of brokering, being able to hold space for conversations, to be able to design good process. These skills happen at micro levels and also very senior macro levels, and the core skill is the same, right? And I think for me, if I had if I can be so presumptuous as to say advice, if I had advice, then I would say, I think part of if you want to, and it's not a futures thing, right? If you want to make change in a complex world, you've got to really be in love with the process, because your outcomes are not guaranteed, your outputs are not guaranteed, right? But if you are able to cultivate, in yourself, in your teams, the perseverance and the patience, to enjoy, the parts of it which are complex stakeholder management, knowledge creation, designing process, holding space, creating new narratives and all that, you're already much, much, much further along, in creating the future that you want. Yeah. So yeah, maybe I'll end there.
Yeah. Anyone else on that question?
Yeah, if I could just add, I think a couple of little points is that, the question is asking like, what is it that young people can do and what are they inheriting? And I think personally, the first thing to sit with is just rage and anger. That the decisions are being made about the future, which do not always have young people and marginalized people at the heart of them. And I think it's important to just recognize that and actually use that to your advantage in some ways. Work with your communities, work with other people to channel that. And sometimes it's not just the age phenomena that's missing. It could be other factors, race, gender, all these other things that might be privileging and not privileging people who are part of the conversation. I think one thing to think about is sometimes in foresight processes, it can feel that the outcome has to be super tangible, it has to be a particular thing, and that formality and that need for that takes away the enjoyment of the activity. And I would kind of say take the pressure off a little bit. If you want to do foresight activity in your community and you want to do it with people, have fun with the process. And actually, that is in and of itself an important outcome because it's about bringing people together and getting ideas heard. And then naturally, that will lead to more people wanting to be part of something. So it's actually just sometimes just reshaping what the objective is of why we're doing the work and why we're trying to do this. And actually not disconnecting from the emotional part of it. And just kind of almost using that to your advantage, the fact that, you're not in the room. So get yourself in the room because you deserve to be in the room.
Fully agree. If I can just be a panelist now and not a moderator, we try to design processes at CIFS, also when it's corporate, where we have parts of the process that are really truly opening up. Of course, in the end, there will be results and key leaders will make decisions, but there is almost always room to really be open and be super explorative. So it's very much in the design. Freya, I think we have a few more questions.
Yeah. I'm going to follow up on a couple of these points that Cheryl and Kushal also started to hint at or mention, but I want to summarize this in a question, which is for a lot of youth-led organizations, which of course have a lot of limited resources, as we know, not so funded. Where's maybe like the easiest place to start with a futures thinking practice? Low cost, what's the first starting point for the young leaders in the room today within their organizations?
And the floor is open.
I just add one point on this. I think just see where it can fit into what you're already doing sometimes. I think like trying to do something entirely new when your budgets are tight, when you've got so many other things to do, it's not easy. So if you're doing a project which is about a particular theme, and you're taking other kinds of approaches to addressing that theme, well, think about, okay, if we're going to do a workshop, how do we jazz up that workshop and bring in a different type of question or bring in a different type of tool or do a different activity there? Or Who can we speak to that we're not currently speaking with? I think it can also just begin there rather than feeling the pressure to create an entirely new stream within your organization when you haven't got the capacity and budget to do so. Um, it can just be something like this. And, if you're somebody who makes films, well, just maybe do a little bit of storytelling about the future before you make the film. Or, if you're somebody who, you're in a youth organization and you're doing a lot of kind of play and gamified stuff, just maybe create a futures oriented game that you're going to use for other things. So it's just seeing how it fits rather than feeling like it needs to be a burden. I think that's an important point.
I love that.
Yeah, I
I have a
totally agree. Oh, sorry.
no, no, go
Noemi?
ahead.
Noemi?
I was just gonna say I totally agree, and I think some projects are, foresight first projects, and some projects are kind of have a foresight angle, can have a futurist thinking angle. So again, like Kushal said, starting with the space you have, the people you have around, what they care about, is a great starting point. And there's a million methods that you can apply to that semi easily. And then you kind of go 1 degree from there, 1 degree from there.
Shao?
I had a slightly cheeky answer. My cheeky answer is that pausing to ask better questions is free. I do sometimes feel that in the anxiety of trying to deal with the future, and this happens at all levels, from individual to organization to society, right? That we tend to be very additive in the way that we think about it. And I wonder whether the solution is actually to be more subtractive, right? To actually pause, to take away, to prioritize. And I feel like, to me, sometimes I joke, with clients, that futures is a good anxiety coping mechanism, right? It's like organization level meditation, like, you pause enough, you stop enough to actually ask yourself some big questions, right? And making sure that what you are striving for and hustling for is really you're moving towards the right questions. Yeah. We'll start there. Yeah. Thanks.
Fully agree. Jonathan, anything to add?
I mean, I completely agree with starting with the right questions. That's, I think, probably the most important thing of our practice, full stop. And then you're going to expect me to say this because I'm a professor, but get reading. There's a lot out there to read about what other people have done. There's a lot of tools out there for free that you can pick up and use. Don't be fearful. Be expansive in your thinking. Um, be purposeful in your thinking as well. So know what it's the right questions, but what are you asking those questions for? Like, why do you want to do it? And so I'd frame it like that, like know why you're doing it, and then work out how. And there's a lot that you can just go and do the research on to. And probably a lot of our websites, actually, you'll find a lot of reports that you can get some inspiration from. And
Uh,
just one little plug on that, actually, Carsten, because I know we're talking to sort of young leaders of the future, but one of the studies that we're about to publish from Foresight Lab is our youth study, and one of the really striking results from it was the extent to which the Gen Z, Gen Alpha, 1,000 respondents who took part in the study told us was the extent to which they are teaching themselves how to use the capabilities of new platforms and AI. Um, that's a real positive, and so that sort of really supports my point of go and find out what to do and do it. The other is the other more challenging findings in there were the extent to which with these new tools, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, using uh, platforms and AI to test their own identities and develop those identities to uh, manage and regulate their emotional states, and then also to explore their creativity. And one shocking stat in there, which I'm interested to know if the audience thinks is shocking, but like 43% of respondents said that they about something that was troubling them, they would talk first to an AI bot rather than a friend or family member. And so the say what of that to me to young leaders of the future is don't forget the human. We are human, and talk to each other rather than talk to bots is my advice. See?
Mhm.
That's a good one. And actually, because we are close to ending this session, that was almost the final round, sort of a piece of advice. Fred, do we have time for one more question, or
Maybe let's sneak in one more,
yeah?
just to, I know, because we had some technical difficulties earlier, so I think it's okay. So I'm going to sort of summarize two questions in one, related to uh, the difference between thinking about finding space to think about the futures, but also recognizing short-term delivery and short-term challenges. So there's a question from Tuka from Myanmar related to an earthquake they experienced, and how can we? It's such a dramatic, significant effect, and how can we use futures thinking in the long run on such an issue like disasters and managing disasters? But I guess also that there's difficulties around that with resources, and how do you think about mitigation compared to dealing with the after effects? And a question from Yuelin also about Southeast Asia and the immediate development pressures that are being faced currently in many developing countries. How do you make that case for futures thinking? I know it's a very big topic when we
Yeah,
try and keep some of the
very big
answers
questions.
short, but I think important to recognize the scale of, we've talked a lot about the individual as well as other ways of looking at futures in bigger scale.
Yeah. And the floor is open. I'm a little bit reminded by what Kushal said about the future as a luxury, in the case of an emergency. But any comments to this question, Jonathan?
I mean, I would say very, very quickly, foresight and futures work can't solve immediate problems in the here and now, obviously, but that doesn't mean you can afford to not do it. I think doing foresight and futures thinking makes you more resilient for those immediate emergencies down the line. So it is a luxury because sometimes you can't afford to invest in it, but it does then make you more resilient.
I also think we're going back to a previous question and what Cheryl replied in terms of the role of young leaders in being brokers. I think there really is something there about planning better for the future. There's a big gap in people who can be good translators and good connectors across science, infrastructure leaders, policymakers. And I do believe that foresight practitioners have a lot of the skills and capabilities to be that. It's really hard, but that gap is there. So I hope we can do more thinking around that and how to be even more how to have even more that role.
Yeah. Cheryl?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I mean, it's a profound question and a non-trivial one, right? I mean, there's definitely one school of thought that says, futures is a luxury, and I would say that if we start with that worldview, then we're also in this development challenge loop, right? And then my maybe if I re-ask the question, then I would say what breaks that loop, and I think lack of path dependency and maybe infrastructure and all these kind of things. I'm not here to romanticize the challenges, but reimagining what the future looks like also helps you not repeat other people's mistakes, right? And just really rethinking what does it look like for my context, that I'm not, just as I'm not inheriting a future that maybe a previous generation has given me, I'm not inheriting a future from the West. I'm not inheriting a future from Singapore, or somewhere else, right? That if I had to think about it from my own context, then I would say, it's really a matter of looking in a clear-eyed way about what your individual context is, and you are the expert in your own context, right, in your own future. And really then, even with the resource constraints, using the power of imagination to really rethink, what are different things that are possible. The other piece that I do find quite critical, and in some sense, I'm going to contradict myself because, evidence-based policy making is also a luxury in some cases, right? Data can be expensive, but at least in the, kind of system change world, I'm a big advocate for this idea of building up evidence infrastructure for the future, right? Meaning that, we are also looking at futures to be able to prioritize, and not spread our resources too thin, right? Because the reality is that we are all constrained, but if you have a better sense of what is coming, of what some of the challenges are, what opportunity space looks like, if you're able to again make decisions from a more clear-eyed perspective, then the ability to be confident in that, okay, even in the conditions of uncertainty, I have made the best decision that I can, with the information and resources that are available to me at this moment, then that is all we can hope to do, right? And I mean, I think for many of you who are, kind of starting out and looking at, tackling some pretty big societal level challenges potentially, and have a very long road ahead of you to do so, I would say become an expert in your own context, both the history as well as the future, right? And let that kind of guide you into finding your own imaginative solutions. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And we are almost at the end of the line. Before I leave the floor to Kushal for your final remark, thank you to all for panelists. I think we could have gone on for a couple of hours more. We need to repeat that somehow. And some of you need to go out and start a t-shirt production line, I can see in the comments. So thank you so much. Kushal, you get the final words, and then over to you, Freya.
Thanks, Kirsten. No, in many ways, just echoing what everybody else has said. I think just that the gap between thinking about the future and then actually doing something in the immediate term when it feels hard. I think it's, the images of the future, or the ideas that we have about the future are in and of themselves worthwhile. They're great. They're useful. They're important for hope, to have a vision to kind of galvanize behind. But at the same time, in some ways, it's more using that, which is more important. It's the people in service of those ideas about the future, or those images of the future. And I think that's where, in those moments of crisis or in the present day when you feel like a need to do something, it's then really kind of putting enough time and prioritizing that piece of your workshop or your process to say, okay, we've got these great ideas. What feels like little steps we can be taking? And that might not be something, in a moment of real crisis. You might not be able to shift the policy making overnight, but you might be able to just mobilize the community to get out onto the streets to do something. You might be able to bring people together around smaller things, which might not feel big in the moment, but they are, and they're steps along that journey. So I think it's just realizing that futures is important. It is the kind of inherent ability that we all have to imagine things. It's just how do you use that in a given moment that is of benefit to you, benefit to the people around you, and gives you that sense of hope and optimism, which is vital to just keep going. So yeah, I think also just have trust in yourselves, like do it with people around you collectively. I think it's hard just to do it in isolation. So that is also kind of vital, and just like, there's no right or wrong answer also when it comes to experimenting with this. So, have fun with it, and do it with other people and enjoy yourselves.
Over to you, Freya.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I also could listen to you all for a lot longer, and I wish we did have more time. But unfortunately, we do have to wrap up today. But I want to have a huge round of applause and thank you for all of you for your contributions today, and for the wonderful questions also from the audience. I will very, very quickly wrap up. Just to say again, thank you for all of the good questions, and that we hope to see you next week again for our next session on technology in futures thinking. We'll be exploring both a little bit about the futures of technologies, but also about using technology in futures thinking itself. So on the screen, you'll be able to see the QR code to sign up for the next session, as well as one more final session as part of this series. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and I hope to see you all again next week. Have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
Bye.